I didn't want to marry him. That much was clear to everyone seated at the long, polished table, from the smirking senators to the board advisors pretending to care. The arrangement had been finalized days ago, and still I couldn't shake the chill of how quickly my life had been packaged and handed off like a diplomatic bribe. His name was Luke Carrington. The younger brother of Senator Adrian Carrington, charming, ruthless, already tipped to be the next presidential nominee. Luke wasn't like him. At least, that's what everyone said. They called him quiet, passive, uninterested in politics. A black sheep with good manners and a forgettable presence. The perfect pawn to marry the daughter of a foreign minister. Me. I studied him from across the table during our engagement dinner. He didn't look at me. Not once. He nodded politely to my father, sipped from his water glass, and answered every question with exactly the number of words required. Even the waitstaff seemed to forget he was there. I thought I'd been paired with a ghost. A safe choice, my father had called it. Less pressure. Less attention. Less risk. I was the youngest daughter of a scandal-ridden family, and this marriage was meant to patch up our public image without threatening the balance of power between nations. He was wallpaper. I was damage control. The first words he said to me were after the dinner ended. We were alone in the corridor leading out of the hotel ballroom. I turned to him, ready to offer a formal goodbye before slipping into the car waiting outside. He beat me to it. Do you know how to play chess? He asked. I blinked, startled. That's how you start a conversation? He didn't smile. I'm asking because this marriage will be a game. I need to know if you understand strategy. That was our first real interaction. Not about our wedding. Not about our families. Chess. I told him I did. I'd learned when I was 8. He nodded once, then walked away without another word. Our wedding was a private affair. Cameras were banned. Only the inner circle attended, and even they looked confused. Adrian Carrington stood at the edge of the aisle, his jaw tense. It was the only emotion I'd ever seen from him that wasn't calculated charm. When he kissed me on the cheek afterward, he whispered, I don't know what game you two are playing, but don't drag us into it. Us. The family. The empire. The dynasty. I wasn't part of that us. Not yet. Our new home was one of the Carrington estates, a sleek glass house nestled in the hills, watched over by staff who spoke only when spoken to. Luke gave me the master bedroom and disappeared into his study. For days, we barely spoke. Meals were taken separately. Schedules remained private. We were married in name only. And yet, I started noticing things. Luke wasn't passive. He was observant. The staff deferred to him with subtle respect. He read briefing documents in languages I hadn't realized he spoke. Every morning, before sunrise, he ran routes through the hills with a security detail trailing behind, quietly, discreetly, like they'd done it for years. He wasn't what they said he was. Neither was I. I'd been raised for diplomacy, molded for the spotlight, trained to smile while bleeding. People thought my silence meant compliance. They mistook composure for weakness. I let them. That's how I survived the fall of my family's influence. That's how I survived my mother's disgrace, my brother's exile, the endless headlines painting us as relics of corruption. I didn't want this marriage. But I wasn't here to be forgotten. I caught Luke watching me one night. I was in the library, pretending to skim a memoir on political negotiation, when I felt it, that quiet pull of attention. He stood in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. You're not here to play nice, are you? He said. Neither are you. We stared at each other for a moment, both acknowledging what neither of us had said out loud. This was an arrangement, but something else was forming underneath it. Something calculated. Curious. Dangerous. He walked in and sat across from me. I closed the book and leaned forward. Why did you agree to this? He tilted his head slightly. You were the only asset my brother couldn't control. That made you interesting. So this is rebellion? It's opportunity. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. That became our pattern, quiet collisions, questions wrapped in innuendo, answers that hinted at deeper motives. We didn't share our plans, but we started moving in sync. Showing up at the same meetings. Watching the same headlines. Making subtle moves behind the scenes that sent ripples through the political landscape neither of us claimed to be part of. The media started whispering. The forgotten brother and the scandalous daughter. A marriage of convenience, or strategy? I didn't know what game Luke was playing. But I was learning the board. And I had the strange feeling that for the first time in years, someone was seeing me, not as a liability, but as a piece worth playing. That terrified me more than I wanted to admit. And intrigued me more than I dared to say. 3 weeks into our marriage, we hosted our first official dinner. It was Luke's idea. He called it a quiet evening, but the guest list said otherwise. A defense consultant. A tech CEO. A disbarred judge recently rumored to be working as a political fixer. And of course, Adrian Carrington, who arrived late, made a show of taking the head seat, then greeted me like I was still a stranger. I watched Luke the entire night. He barely spoke. He asked questions instead. Smart ones. Probing ones. And when people tried to dismiss him, he'd let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was studying them. Tracking power like a predator in an expensive suit. And I was starting to do the same to him. That night, when the last guest had gone and the staff began clearing plates, I stood by the window of the sitting room with a glass of wine in hand. Luke walked in behind me. He didn't speak until I looked at him. You see what I mean now? He said. About the game? About positioning. I turned back to the window, where the city lights blinked below the hills. You're not trying to stay out of politics. You're trying to get behind it. He didn't smile, but his eyes gleamed. That's where the real power lies. Behind the throne, not on it. And me? I asked. Where do I fit in? He came closer, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. You're the unexpected move. The one they didn't prepare for. I chose you because no one sees you coming. It wasn't a compliment, not really. But it felt like one. For years, I'd been told to sit down, be quiet, smile and nod while men shaped the world in front of me. Luke didn't want a silent wife. He wanted a partner. Or at least an ally. A fellow strategist in the war he was quietly preparing for. And I was starting to want in. The next morning, I woke early and found a dossier on the kitchen counter with my name printed neatly across the top. Inside were files, names, companies, private agendas. Some were people we'd met at dinner. Some were ones we hadn't met yet. Luke walked in, still dressed in black from his run, and poured himself coffee without a word. You left this for me? He nodded. Why? Because you're smart. And I want to see what you do with it. That was how it began. We didn't talk about trust. We tested it. We didn't make promises. We made moves. Every time I uncovered something useful, Luke made room for me in the next step of his plan. He never praised me outright, but he started consulting me before meetings. He asked what I thought. And he listened. We still slept in separate rooms. But I found myself lingering outside his study at night. I'd pass by, pause, then keep walking. Once, I knocked. He didn't invite me in. He just opened the door, handed me another file, and said, "This one's trickier. Let me know what you think." There were moments when I forgot this marriage wasn't real. Like when he stood behind me at a gala, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, guiding me through the crowd with practiced ease. Or when he adjusted my earring during a photo op, fingers brushing my neck just long enough to set my skin on fire. But those were performances. That's what I told myself. Until the night we were followed. It happened after a quiet dinner at a private club. One of those hush-hush places where billionaires laughed too loudly and deals were made without records. Luke and I left early. Our driver took the long route home, winding through the hills, when Luke's hand suddenly closed over mine. "Stay still," he said. I froze. "What is it?" "The SUV behind us. It's not one of ours." He leaned forward, speaking low to the driver. "Change route. Drop us 2 blocks from the house. Tell security to sweep the perimeter." We got out on a dark side road. I was wearing heels, but Luke didn't wait. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the trees that edged the estate's property line. We moved fast, silent. I didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. When we finally reached the service entrance at the back of the house, I was breathless, my dress torn at the hem, hair clinging to my skin. Inside, Luke locked the door, turned off the lights, and watched the monitors in the hidden control room behind his study. He didn't speak for a long time. I stood behind him, heart racing. Then he turned. "You okay?" I nodded. Adrenaline still buzzed through me, but I felt something sharper beneath it. Not fear. Not exactly. Excitement. "Who was that?" I asked. He shook his head. "Could be anyone. We've stirred the water lately." "We?" He looked at me then, eyes dark and unreadable. You're not out of this anymore, Ava. He used my name. For the first time since our wedding. And in that moment, with the screens flickering behind him and the night pressing against the windows, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want to be out. Not anymore. The morning after the break-in, security swarmed the estate. Plainclothes agents checked every door and window, while Luke held a series of meetings I wasn't invited to. I watched from the second-floor landing as men twice my age gave him updates like he was their superior officer. He nodded, gave commands, asked questions so precise they couldn't have come from someone uninterested in power. When the house finally quieted, I found him in the study, staring at a map spread across his desk. They didn't breach the house, he said before I could ask. But they knew the route. That means someone's watching the driver or the logistics team. So someone inside? Or someone close enough to pretend they are. I stepped closer, studying the pins and strings stretched across the map. It wasn't just our estate. It was the entire city. Political buildings. Corporate offices. Even international embassies. Luke wasn't just building a network, he already had one. I touched a small red marker near the coast. This is the CEO we had dinner with last week. Why is he here? Because he's laundering funds through a shipping subsidiary. And he thinks I don't know. Do you? He looked up, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. I know everything I need to. He stepped aside and gestured for me to sit. There was a second file on the desk. My name was written on the tab again. You want me to help you with this? I asked. I want you to lead it. That CEO's wife runs a foundation your mother used to donate to. If you can get her to talk, we'll find out who else is in his pocket. This wasn't political theater anymore. This was a war in the shadows. And Luke wanted me on the front lines. So I did it. I arranged a lunch, played the socialite card, asked innocent questions about philanthropy while slipping in references only someone close to the operation would notice. The wife took the bait. She talked too much, dropped too many names. By the time dessert arrived, I had everything Luke needed. He didn't praise me when I told him. He just nodded and added 3 new pins to the map. Later that night, I sat outside on the balcony, legs curled beneath me, listening to the wind. I didn't hear him come out until he sat beside me with 2 glasses of whiskey. You did well, he said. So did you. For someone who's supposed to be invisible. He glanced at me, then out at the city lights below. That's the trick. Let them forget you until you're standing over them. I studied his profile. There were scars on his knuckles, small, faded, but real. His jaw tightened like he was always preparing for an attack. He carried himself like someone who didn't trust peace to last. And yet, sitting beside me, something about him had softened. Why me? I asked. You could have had any political alliance. Why choose the daughter of a disgraced minister? Because you're not safe. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. You've already lost everything once. That makes you careful. And dangerous. I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended. But you don't trust me. He looked at me then. Really looked. I don't trust anyone. But I respect you. It wasn't what I expected to hear. But somehow, it meant more. The next day, we appeared together at a press event. For once, the cameras didn't cut away when Luke spoke. He answered every question with sharp precision, making headlines with phrases that suggested confidence, control, and a quiet edge no one had seen before. When a reporter asked about our marriage, I smiled and looped my arm through his. Like any partnership, it's about strategy and trust, I said. We've got both. It was the first time I'd spoken on record since the wedding. And it was the first time Luke didn't correct or redirect me. Later that evening, we returned home to find a bouquet waiting at the gate. Black roses. No note. Luke's jaw clenched as he stared at them. Burn them, he told the staff. Then turned to me. I need to show you something. He led me down a corridor I'd never noticed before, past the wine cellar, through a door hidden behind a bookcase. Inside was a secured vault. Monitors lined the walls. Files lined the shelves. Maps. Names. Codes. Faces. This is what I've built, he said quietly. And you're the only person I've let in here. I turned in a slow circle, the air thick with the weight of it all. You've been planning this for years. Since I was 17. Since I realized Adrian would never let me be anything more than a family ornament. But power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who watches, waits, and strikes when no one's looking. And me? I asked again. What do I become in all this? He walked toward me, closer than ever before. His voice dropped. You become the one who stands beside me when it all falls into place. The silence stretched between us, charged and intimate. I didn't pull away when his fingers brushed mine. I didn't stop him when he leaned in, voice a whisper against my skin. We're not pretending anymore, Ava. And I wasn't. The next time we stepped into public, everything had changed. Rumors swirled, but they were no longer about me. They were about us. About the quiet Carrington brother who'd suddenly begun reshaping influence behind closed doors. About the foreign minister's daughter who now whispered in the ears of men twice her age and watched them nod. We didn't deny the speculation. We let it feed the myth. I was no longer the girl handed off like a failed diplomatic gift. I was becoming something else. Something sharper. Luke had shown me the game, and I'd memorized the rules. But what he didn't expect, what no one expected, was how quickly I learned how to break them. We traveled together often now, appearing at summits and fundraisers and hushed negotiations that weren't on official schedules. One evening, after a private dinner in Geneva, we returned to our suite to find the room swept clean, too clean. Luke's eyes narrowed the second he stepped inside. He signaled for me to wait in the hallway, but I ignored him and followed. Behind the headboard, tucked into the seam of the upholstery, I found it, a listening device, cleverly wired, nearly invisible. Luke pried it out, held it up, then crushed it in his hand. They're getting braver, I said. Or sloppier. We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we sat across from each other at the table near the window, analyzing who had the most to gain from bugging our suite. The list was long, and it was getting longer by the week. You never told me what you really want, I said, after hours of quiet strategy. He looked up from the notes. Power. That's not new. Everyone wants that. Not the kind they flaunt. The kind they never have to show. You want to be kingmaker. I want to decide who sits on the throne. And who doesn't. I studied him. The honesty in his voice wasn't cruel. It was calm. Calculated. And for the first time, I realized just how lonely he must have been before this. Before me. What happens when you get what you want? He leaned forward. Then I make sure you get what you want too. The words lodged somewhere deep in my chest. That night, he didn't return to his separate room. He sat beside me on the couch until I fell asleep. When I woke, his arm was draped around my waist, his breath warm against my neck. We didn't talk about it the next morning. We didn't have to. Back in the city, a storm was brewing. Adrian Carrington requested a family meeting, urgent, closed door, in the main Carrington estate. When we arrived, the room was full. Adrian, their father, and a dozen advisors. Luke greeted no one. I followed his lead, spine straight, mask polished. Adrian didn't waste time. What exactly do you think you're doing? Luke met his brother's glare with a calm I hadn't seen before. Winning. You've been making deals in my name. Undermining our alliances. Shifting loyalties. Do you have any idea what you've risked? Everything. And it's working. Adrian stepped forward. You were supposed to be harmless. That was your first mistake. He turned to me. And you? You think this marriage gives you power? I smiled. It doesn't give me power. But it lets me sit at the table while I take it. The room stilled. Adrian's father spoke for the first time. We put you with Luke to neutralize you. To keep you quiet. And you gave me a front row seat instead. Adrian's face darkened. You're playing a game you can't win. Then why does it feel like you're the one scrambling? Luke stepped between us. His voice was ice. You underestimated me my whole life. Now you'll see what happens when I stop playing along. Adrian didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension in the room said enough. As we left, Luke didn't speak. He held my hand, fingers tight around mine, as if grounding himself. In the car, I finally asked what he'd never said out loud. What happens if this turns into a war? It already is. And us? He turned to me. I'll protect you. I shook my head. That's not what I asked. He was quiet, then whispered, I won't leave you behind. Not now. Not ever. It wasn't love yet. But it was something terrifyingly close. And I wasn't sure who I was more afraid for, the world we were about to dismantle, or us, standing in the center of it, daring it to push back. The retaliation came quietly. It started with whispers. Calls that dropped without ringing, appointments that vanished from official logs, invitations revoked from circles that once courted us. Luke noticed it first. He always did. The pattern was too precise, too calculated to be random. Someone was trying to isolate us. Cut off our reach before the next move. Then came the hit to my family. A sudden audit on my father's remaining accounts. An investigation reopened on my brother's exile. Photos leaked from years ago. Cropped, distorted, taken out of context, surfaced in media channels overnight, reigniting scandals I'd spent years burying. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. Adrian. Luke was silent when I confronted him. He stood at the edge of the terrace, staring into the night like he'd known this moment would come. He's trying to fracture us, I said. Then we hold tighter, Luke replied. That was the night we began to move differently. Luke adjusted his public profile, less shadow, more spotlight. He made speeches, attended press briefings, began shaping policy through back channels, positioning himself as the voice of reason while Adrian looked increasingly erratic in the media. And I became the weapon Adrian hadn't anticipated. I spoke at charities. I held luncheons for powerful women he'd underestimated. I spun public opinion with a smile and a headline-ready quote. They called me the Steel Rose. The beautiful warning. But behind closed doors, we were bleeding. Security doubled. Staff were replaced. We found another device, this one embedded in the lining of one of Luke's jackets. We didn't flinch anymore. We expected it. One night, after a meeting with a foreign ambassador that ran too long, we returned home to find our bedroom door ajar. Luke went in first. His voice was cold. Don't touch anything. The room had been searched. Subtly, but not expertly. A message, not a robbery. I walked to my vanity and found a single item moved, a photo frame of my mother, laid flat. I stared at it, my hands cold. This was personal now. Luke crossed the room and picked it up. We're done being polite. The next day, he made a call. I didn't ask who it was to. But the fallout came fast. 3 senators announced sudden retirements. A foundation tied to Adrian lost its funding overnight. News broke of a confidential memo linking Adrian to questionable foreign interests. It wasn't a direct hit, it was worse. It was doubt. And doubt spreads like fire. That evening, Luke poured us both a drink. We stood in the quiet of the library, the air between us thick with everything we hadn't said. You didn't flinch, he said. Neither did you. He looked down into his glass. I always thought power was about control. But I think it's about commitment. About deciding what you're willing to lose for it. What are you willing to lose? He looked at me. Not you. I swallowed hard. I didn't want tenderness. I wanted truth. What happens if Adrian falls? Then we either rise in his place, or fall with him. And us? His voice was low. That's the only thing I want to keep, Ava. The only thing I won't trade. I didn't realize I was trembling until he took the glass from my hand. Then don't lose me, I said. He pulled me close, hands gripping my waist, forehead against mine. Then don't let go. We kissed. Not with desperation, but with certainty. With the quiet fury of 2 people who'd been forged in fire and found something real in the smoke. Afterward, we didn't say much. We didn't need to. We knew what came next. The war was no longer looming. It had already begun. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a pawn. I felt like the queen. It wasn't a scandal that took Adrian down. It was erosion. One by one, his allies began to distance themselves. Subtle at first, less frequent calls, delays in endorsements, smaller campaign donations. Then came the press leaks. Anonymous sources. Whispers of discontent. Behind the scenes, Luke had orchestrated it all, not with brute force but with silence, pressure, and well-timed truths. I watched as Adrian's certainty cracked. He smiled too tightly during interviews. His eyes darted at events. His composure began to rot. We didn't celebrate. Not openly. But we both knew the end was near. Luke and I had become a machine. Efficient. Calculated. Powerful. We met with ministers, advisors, and donors behind closed doors, never promising too much, always giving just enough to keep them close. They came for Luke's strategy and stayed because they started to believe in the pair of us, this unlikely marriage that somehow worked. It wasn't until one night, during a private dinner with one of the oldest families in the city, that I realized how much had changed. The hostess smiled at me from across the table. You two remind me of my grandparents, she said. They built everything together. Stone by stone. Power like that doesn't come often. But when it does, it lasts. Luke didn't look at me, but I could feel the shift in him. The way his fingers brushed mine under the table. The way he reached for my glass when I wasn't looking and refilled it without asking. After the guests left, we stood in the foyer in silence. Stone by stone, I said. He turned to me. We're not finished yet. No, I agreed. But we're close. He nodded once, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. Before you panic, he said, it's not what you think. He opened it. Inside was a ring, not a wedding band, but a signet. It bore the crest of the Carrington family, but subtly redesigned. Sharper. Stronger. This is yours, he said. I frowned. I thought you didn't believe in symbolism. I don't. But everyone else does. He took my hand and slid it onto my finger. Now they'll know you don't stand beside me. You stand with me. The next morning, Adrian made his final move. He called a press conference, expecting the room to be packed. It wasn't. He'd planned to announce a new initiative, but halfway through his speech, a question from a journalist unraveled everything. Senator, do you deny the financial ties to the foreign account listed in yesterday's leak? He tried to laugh it off. Deflect. But more questions came. Louder. Sharper. Luke and I watched it from the estate, the live stream playing on every screen in the house. By the time the conference ended, Adrian's political career was over. That night, Luke and I sat on the rooftop, a bottle of champagne between us. We didn't toast. We didn't cheer. We sat in silence as the city below us kept spinning. You could run now, I said. If you wanted to. Nothing's stopping you. He glanced at me. And leave this? The Carrington name? No. You. He leaned back, looking up at the stars. I used to think I wanted to burn this family to the ground. To dismantle everything they built and leave them with nothing. But now? Now? I want to rebuild it. On my terms. With someone who sees me. I didn't speak. I just reached for his hand. He turned to me, expression unreadable. I love you, Ava. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't whispered in the dark after a kiss. It was quiet. Certain. I squeezed his hand. I love you too. It should have been the end. A neat bow. Power, love, victory. But stories like ours don't end cleanly. Especially not when the old guard doesn't know when to stay buried. Especially not when Adrian still had one last card to play. The footage was sent to every major news outlet. A grainy clip from 5 years ago. Me, at a private event in Paris, standing beside a diplomat later disgraced in a bribery scandal. The implication was obvious. That I was involved. That I had always been involved. That Luke Carrington's wife had lied about everything and built her new empire on the ashes of old crimes. It aired on a loop. Headlines exploded. Accusations rained in before I'd even had time to dress that morning. By the time I reached the estate's media room, reporters were camped outside the gates, shouting questions into the wind. Luke stood in front of the monitors, arms crossed, jaw tight. It's not real, I said. I know. I didn't even speak to him that night. I was asked to take a photo with him, that was it. I know, Ava. Then why do you look like this? Because I know what Adrian's really doing. He wasn't trying to destroy you. He was trying to force my hand. He knew I wouldn't let you burn alone. He knew I'd either step down, or burn everything down. So what do we do? Luke turned to me. We stopped playing defense. For the next 48 hours, I disappeared. Not literally, but visibly. I stayed inside, avoided cameras, let the narrative spiral. The world loves a scandal, but it loves a comeback more. Luke moved behind the scenes, pulling strings, pressuring allies, threatening exposure. He leaked a counter-narrative, evidence of the video's editing, records that proved I wasn't tied to the diplomat in question, a timeline that unraveled Adrian's plot thread by thread. Then, on the third day, we called our own press conference. It was held on the Carrington lawn, with cameras lined like soldiers and microphones pointed like daggers. I stood beside Luke, wearing black. Not as mourning, but as armor. The accusations made against me are not just false, I said, they are strategic. Political. And desperate. Luke stepped forward next. This is not just an attack on my wife. It's an attack on every woman who refuses to be silent. On every marriage that's more than a headline. On every threat to the old guard who can't stand to see the game played by someone smarter than them. By the end of the broadcast, the tide had turned. Calls of support poured in. Journalists issued retractions. Social media trended with my name beside words like resilience and revenge. Adrian's last play had failed. But the win didn't feel like victory. Later that night, Luke sat with me on the edge of the bed, his hands laced with mine, forehead pressed to my temple. "I hate that I couldn't stop it before it reached you," he said. "You did more than stop it. You believed me. That shouldn't be rare. But it is." He didn't reply. He just held me tighter. I thought I'd feel relief. Maybe triumph. But what I felt was something quieter. He hadn't saved me. He'd stood beside me. Let me speak for myself. Trusted me with the fallout. That was worth more than any win. Weeks passed. The noise faded. We rebuilt what little had cracked. And one afternoon, as I stepped out of a meeting and into the car, I looked at Luke beside me and realized something had shifted again. We weren't strategists anymore. Not just. We were something more dangerous. We were in love. We were unstoppable. And this time, there was no one left to challenge us. Or so we thought. Because sometimes, when you rise too far, too fast, the fall doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. It started with a whisper in a hallway. A senator, one we'd both trusted, paused before entering a meeting and muttered something under his breath to Luke. Just 2 words. He didn't think I heard them. But I did. She knew. Luke's expression didn't change, but when the meeting ended, he was distant. Cold. The way he'd been when we first met. That night, he didn't come to bed. The next morning, he left before I woke. I told myself it was work. Strategy. Damage control. But deep down, something twisted. The whisper stuck in my head. She knew. Knew what? I started checking files. Backdated messages. Records of meetings I hadn't attended. Luke's calendar. There were gaps. Small ones. Things I hadn't noticed before. Meetings that didn't add up. Notes with missing initials. And then I found it, tucked at the bottom of an encrypted folder Luke had shared with me months ago. A transcript. From 6 months before our wedding. It was a conversation between Adrian and Luke. Not one I'd ever heard about. And in it, Adrian had offered him something: funding, control, even a seat at the table, if he agreed to marry me and keep me out of politics. Not out of protection. Out of containment. The transcript ended with Luke saying, "Let me worry about her. I'll keep her in check." I stared at the screen, hands shaking. I didn't remember standing. Or walking. Only the sound of the door to Luke's study slamming against the wall as I entered. "Tell me this is fake." He looked up from his desk. He didn't ask what I meant. He just stood slowly. "Ava, is it fake?" His silence was answer enough. I stepped back like he'd struck me. "So what was I? Your opening move?" "At first." The words cut through the air like a blade. "I didn't mean to fall in love with you. That wasn't the plan." I laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't reach your eyes. The kind that hides the break. "You built me up just so you could control me." "No. I gave you the tools. I never thought you'd use them better than I could." "That's not love, Luke. That's manipulation." He stepped forward. "It was survival. And then it became something else. Too late." A long silence stretched between us. "I wanted to tell you," he said. 100 times. But every time I thought I could, we were already deeper. And I didn't know how to say it without losing you. "Then you never really had me, did you?" I walked out before he could answer. For the next week, I stayed in the city. At a hotel under a different name. Alone. I ignored his calls. His messages. His attempts to reach out through mutual allies. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to feel like I wasn't just a piece on someone else's board. And yet, even as I pushed him away, I couldn't escape the truth. Everything I'd become with him. Not because of him. But with him. We had forged power together. Strategized together. Fought side by side. Whatever his reasons at the start, Luke had never clipped my wings. If anything, he'd sharpened them. I hated him for how he started. I missed him for how he ended. On the 8th day, I returned to the estate. Not because I forgave him. but because I needed to see his face when I told him it wasn't over, but it wasn't the same. I found him where I first met him, standing by the window, staring out like the world might shift if he waited long enough. You lied to me, I said. Yes. You used me. At the start, yes. Then why do I still want to stand beside you? His eyes finally met mine. Because you're the only person who sees me. And the only one who could break me. I stepped closer. Then don't give me another reason to. He nodded once. And in that quiet, trembling space between anger and something deeper, I saw the boy beneath the man. The one who had always been playing a game just to survive it. And I realized I had a choice. I could leave. Or I could stay and rewrite the rules myself. This time, not as a pawn. Not even as the queen. But as the player who set the whole board on fire.